Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being with us tonight. Joining us now, Ernie Eves, the 23rd Premier of the province of Ontario, Mike Harris, the 22nd Premier of the province of Ontario, Bob Rae, the 21st Premier of the province of Ontario, and David Peterson, the 20th Premier of the province of Ontario. We are very happy to have you four here. We want to add, however, that we are so sorry this morning to have gotten a call from Kathy Davis, Bill Davis's wife, saying that he was really under the weather, wanted to be here, wasn't able to be here. It was not, I think, out of fear of jousting with any of you four, but
I'm sure not.
but we wish him well, obviously, a speedy recovery, and we miss him today. I want to start with when you all start thinking about getting the job you all had. I think the public is under the impression that perhaps not in the womb, but shortly thereafter, you start thinking about becoming Premier. Is that the case, David Peterson?
Absolutely not. My life is just actually, it's a case of happy accidents. Just things just happened to me, and there was really no great malice aforethought or planning. It just kind of happened. I wasn't planning on running, but I did run, and I ended up in a leadership that I wasn't looking for. I remember when, after I was elected the first time in 1975, the press came to me and said, "Are you going to run for leadership after Bob Nixon resigned?" And I said, "Geez, I haven't even found the washroom in Queen's Park. How can I do that?" But I did, and almost won.
Bob Rae, you no doubt thought about being Premier from the time you were 1 year old.
No.
Maybe not.
No, not at all. In fact, I didn't really think about being Premier until about September the 5th, 1990. I mean, when I went into provincial politics, I always thought it was a chance that I'd be Premier, but I mean, some people said I would never be Premier, but I always thought there was a chance, but I never thought it was a likelihood, and I think I've talked on this program a couple of times how in the spring of 1990, I decided to leave politics, and my brother died the year before, and for a variety of reasons, I thought it was time for me to go, and I'm sure a number of other people thought that as well. So, so when the election was called, I was thinking to myself, it's going to be the last election, but there you are. No, I mean, I think always felt that it would be a great honor to be Premier, but as when you're leader of the third party, as I was when I started, it's not something you necessarily think is your destiny bound to happen.
The guy sitting beside you was also leader of the third party when he became Premier. Did you, when you were leading the third place party? No?
I'm like David. Things happen in your life. Never did I dream that I would be a politician, that I would be an MPP, that I was happy with my little life in North Bay. I was running a golf course, I was running a ski hill, I was chairman of the school board, and I thought life doesn't get any better than this. Maybe I was right.
You actually quit politics. You left.
I did.
So did you, at that point in your life, think that you ever wanted to be Premier? I mean, you were gone after all.
No. I thought for sure my good friend Michael was going to stay and run at least one more time. And I thought it was time to do something else in my life. I contributed almost 20 years of my life to public service. But public service, I think, is how we probably all got there in the first place. I think that 99.9% of the people that get into public life, this may shock the public out there, are actually there for the right reasons.
We're very interested in that 0.1% though, aren't we?
And yeah, you seem to hone in on that 0.1%.
Yeah.
But really, I think we've all done things in our communities or the area of the province that we come from. In my case, it was being president of the Kinsman Club, helping out with cystic fibrosis, doing things for other people, and as both David and Mike have said, along comes somebody and asks you to consider politics, which I'd never really considered at all. My family was fairly apolitical. My grandfather actually was a friend and a supporter of Paul Martin's in Windsor, Ontario. So it's a small world, and one thing leads to another. I don't think
You do have some redeeming qualities.
you'll be happy to hear it.
You should have told people about this before.
Well, let's show some tape here, shall we? David Peterson, you want to see what you looked like in 1982?
God, I'm embarrassed. Just like Dorian Gray, is it?
Michael, here's David Peterson winning the leadership of the Liberal Party of Ontario in 1982. Roll tape.
I am optimistic about the future, and with this great party, with this team of candidates, then with these people in the cabinet, with your help and your talents and your energy and commitment over the next 3 years, ladies and gentlemen, I am confident that we can form the government. I thank you very much.
Do you mind writing that again?
Do you even recognize that guy?
Boy, good-looking fella, eh?
Did you really believe that, David? That you were confident you were going
actually,
to form the government?
My mother wouldn't have believed it.
Is that ultimately, I mean, leadership conventions, and one of you is going through it again right now, leadership conventions can be awfully nasty business. At the end of the day, what's the impression you're left with running for the leadership of a party?
Tough. They're tough. It's an internal war, you know, and emotions are felt very strongly. Some parties never recover from that. I think you can argue that the Federal Liberal Party didn't recover that, and it's just going through the process now of recovering from that with a new race and a lot of new people and new energies and new ideas, and without the baggage of the past, which is probably a good thing. But sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Often the person that runs second does not recover, because they honestly believe they should have won. And
unless you win big, and you all won big. You all won your respective leadership conventions, if I can say it relatively easily.
I still think David's right, that I think that there is I think the hard part about a party convention is that you're asking people that you know and that you've known, or in some context you've worked with, and to say, you know, why don't you think I should be the person? Why should it be the other person? In an election, you've got philosophies, you've got different camps, you know, you're arguing against people, and it's easier. There's a kind of the sting of partisanship actually allows you to say and do things that in the context of inside a party is harder. And I do think there's a sense internally of people saying, well, I remember so-and-so, and I didn't get it, and I should have gotten it. And there is a process to go through, and I think you have to work hard as a leader. I mean, one of the first things that you have to do as a leader when you win a convention is to really work hard with the people who didn't win and say, how can we create the team here that's going to be bigger than any one of us?
There's two things that dictate this. There's the people that are running, how they campaign, how they run, how they handle themselves after the convention, for the good of the new leader, for the good of the party. In my case, it was with Diane Cunningham. She was marvelous, and it was very easy. There is a second thing. There is process. Our party went through a delegated convention, very bitter one, that Miller won, Timbrow, Grossman, right, and there were great divisions in there, as there were in the Liberal Party with the Martinites and the Chrétienites. The process helped as well. The one member, one vote. Everybody having a say. No longer were you able to influence delegates, so to speak, and the arm twisting and the backroom side.
Not quite as interesting to watch, though.
It's terrible TV,
yeah, it
but it was good politics from a point of view of selling memberships, of broadening the party, and of having a less bitter race, in my view.
Well, you like the others, won relatively easily. I mean, you wouldn't say so today,
No,
but
I wouldn't say that.
But it didn't go to 5 or 6 ballots or something, right? It was over pretty quickly.
Right.
Does that help bring things together afterwards?
It does, in a way. I agree with Michael's point about the process certainly helped quite a bit. I think when you do have, although it's not as exciting for the media, I understand that, but I think it is a more democratic way of electing a leader. And I also think that it helps that you're out there in that process as opposed to trying to lobby 10 or 12 or 14 delegates from each riding. I also think there's another aspect to this, and that is, I think we all in public life understand that there are some nasty things that go on. I think, however, people that work for you in whatever particular leadership campaign sometimes get a little carried away. And that certainly builds up animosities that don't need to exist necessarily.
I want to talk about family, because one of the things we often hear from people who are in public life, they say that the members of the general public have no clue what kind of sacrifices have to be made in terms of family life. And we often hear when people leave public life, they always say, the first thing they say is, I'm going to get a chance to spend more time with my family. I remember Bill Davis once telling me that he sees his grandchildren more than he ever saw his own kids, because he was premier when he had little kids, and now, of course, after being out of politics, it's easier. I want to play some tape from Kathy Davis, his wife, and from Neil Davis, his son, on how Mr. Davis, in his day, balanced family life, and then we'll come back and talk. Roll tape, please. He was, by the standards of today's fathers, not pulling his weight around this house, was he?
No.
I mean, he brags about the fact that he's never changed a diaper
He
in
was
his life.
definitely absentee father.
He was a terrific father, but he didn't have the time to devote to us that other fathers had. And he has more time now. So he spends quite a bit of time with his grandchildren, I think making up a little bit for the time he missed with us.
Are you over there? Can you get me some more?
we did have a rule that the kids would be at the breakfast table and he would appear every morning, and he did, and we had breakfast together because we never had evening meals together. So we just sort of turned that around. Other families don't eat breakfast together but have supper together, so we sort of turned that around, and that was helpful. There was a period of time every day when they had access to Bill.
Mr. Peterson, when you were premier, you had 3 little kids. And I want to ask, in retrospect, was the personal sacrifice worth the public achievements you did in the job?
Don't get the impression this is a horrible, huge sacrifice. You can do all of these things if you have the energy for it and where your priorities are. I must say, in my case, my kids were the first in my life. I scheduled in their hockey games and their days at school and that kind of thing. There was nothing else in our lives, and Shelley and my lives. It was the kids and work, and her work as well. But I remember Bill Davis, interesting, soon after I assumed the leadership of the party, and who knows where it was going to go, said to me, and we were talking about John Robarts, who he loved and I loved. I was from London, Ontario. But he said, I'm going to give you some free advice, David. Always go home at night. And I brought Shelley and the kids, and I had 2 kids then, to Toronto, and we had a 1-bedroom apartment. One kid had a crib in our bedroom, and the other kid had slept in a drawer. And we were together as a family, and every Friday night we would get in the station wagon with the dog, drive back to London, drive back Sunday night. Every single Sunday night that I was in public life, we had Sunday dinner at the McDonald's in Kitchener on the 401. But we were together, and we would talk and play games and all of that kind of stuff. And my kids, I think I'm biased, obviously. My kids are pretty terrific, and we spend a lot of time with them, and Shelley's a fabulous mom. But I think, now the kids do suffer somewhat because people criticize them for the mistakes of their father and can be harsh. But the flip side is, it opens a lot of other avenues to these kids and opens perspectives. They see things they wouldn't in other worlds. So I don't think we have any right to feel sorry for ourselves. I think it's our responsibility as leaders of families or as family people to make those things work, and I think it can work, and I think I know many, many examples of it's worked extremely well.
I think we made my life's not that different from David's. My kids are a little bit younger than David's, but they were very young when I was started in politics. I mean, Judith was born just before I won the convention, and then the kids grew up the whole time I was in politics in Ontario. We lived in the same house we always lived in. I lived in Toronto, which is the big advantage because you didn't have to worry about commuting, which is, I think, a real problem. If people are living in Thunder Bay or even in North Bay, and you're traveling back and forth, and you've got that constant 2 homes going, it's tough. I mean, it's not easy.
Do you think your kids would agree with this analysis?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do. And in fact, we've talked about it quite a bit. I mean, I think they're in school, right? And who knows what kids say to them about, what your dad's up to and, whatever the hell
well,
else
I think
is
we do
going
know.
on. We know a couple of comments that have been made. But, we always took, I remember once we were having a big fight in the house about, Christmas recess, right? And I'd committed that we were going to go down to Florida for 2 weeks with the kids. And I went. And some of my caucus colleagues were very upset because, we were supposed to stay and fight. And I said, look, I'm not in favor of prolonging this thing. Let's get it over with. We've all got families and lives. But we also did things that I think at the House through the 80s that I think did change things. I mean, sort of the image of the hard drinking, the Mitch Hepburn, taking over the floor of the King Eddie Hotel, and that was the life for a period of time in the 30s and 40s, and that's what you did.
And 50s and
60s and whatever else.
Not the 70s when we were.
No, but I'm just saying when we got rid of night sittings, it was not unusual for me to go home and say, that's it, I'm done. Home, get home at 7 o'clock, 7:30, 8 o'clock, and you're done.
And it must have been harder for Mike Harris because your home was 4 hours away.
Listen, I think I'm more on the side here of David and Bob. Truck drivers had it tougher than I did on the road for 5 days. Traveling salesmen, the CEO of companies,
That's
worldwide
all true.
companies.
They don't write about it in the newspaper. They're not accountable to the same number of groups that you are.
No, that's true, but that's a different issue. That's a different issue. I mean, David touched a little bit on your kids and your family bear the brunt a little bit. There's no secret that education reforms during my term caused my kids a fair bit of grief at school. From a small minority of teachers and a whole bunch of kids. I mean, kids are, that's the way kids are. But I'll tell you, it's a huge net positive. I mean, learning that not everybody loves your dad is a pretty good lesson in life. And
That's my kid's easiest
well,
lesson.
that's right. And the advantages, you know, David touched on it, the advantages that you have. And I agree, you make it work. You travel with them, you find those times. But I think it's wrong for anybody to say, well, I can't go into politics. Now, I used to tell candidates that. They'd say, I can't go into politics now, I got young kids. Well, you talk to we were talking earlier about young lawyers. I mean, you know, with a young family, these guys got to work 80, 90 hours in the financial community. So that's wrong. It's a public life. That's what's different.
That's the difference.
You miss stuff, though, don't you, Mr. Eves? You miss a lot of
Yeah,
stuff.
I think the big difference is the last comment Michael just made, and that is it is a public life. Everything you do is now open to the public. And it takes you a while to adjust to that and to accept that. Sometimes I think family members find it more difficult to adjust to than the member themselves. But I agree, it's a double-edged sword. You certainly have more exposure, your children do, to things that they never would be exposed to. I know Natalie was 5 and Justin was 8 when I was first elected, and Natalie conducted an election in her kindergarten class, which I won quite easily instead of by 6 votes in a recount. I wish they were all that easy. But they both did get very involved and interested in the political process. I remember Justin commenting, he actually did a few ads for me in the '95 campaign, and they asked some of the questions that you were talking to Neil Davis about. And he said, look, my dad's always there when he has to be. When there are big things to be done, he makes a point to be there.
I wonder if any of you would want your kids to go into politics, though.
Absolutely.
You would?
Without any hesitation, if they wanted to. I mean, only if they wanted to, and if they knew, you know, and the one thing you do have to be prepared for is the publicity. If you're not prepared to live at least part of your life in public and manage the kind of the criticism and the fishbowl aspect of it, then that's hard. But everything else, every other part of it, in terms of you're doing a public service, the excitement of it, the fact that you're able to make the decisions, you're getting into the great arguments about ideas and about public policy, I mean, it's a fantastic life.
Well, let me follow up on that, because I want to move into a part of our discussion now about actually doing the job. And I've always wondered what it is like. I mean, David Peterson, you took over in the Premier's office in 1985. I want to know what that moment is like when you walk into that office that has been occupied by some pretty legendary figures over the years, and you actually sit down in that chair and you look at that desk and you think, I'm one of, in your case, 20 people who's had this job. What goes through your head?
You're going to accuse me of gross arrogance, but I remember that moment. I remember it very, very well. And I walked in, and I sat down, and I said to myself, I feel very, very comfortable.
Comfortable.
And
Why are you laughing, Bob Ray?
I wasn't filled with trepidation. I had a fabulous team, even though we had it wasn't that we had an experienced team. We'd never had anybody that had been on the government side before. But we had very capable people. We knew what we were going to do, and we started doing it. And I felt very comfortable. I wasn't daunted by it. I wasn't overawed by it. And the truth is, politicians are just ordinary people who by chance or circumstance or luck end up where they are because they've taken some risks in their own lives.
Mr. Ray, you never expected to be in that chair. When you sat in it, what'd you think?
Well, the room was pretty empty when I got there, so I mean, it was.
You lost all your people?
No.
They all ran away. They're afraid
David took everything with him.
Thank you,
He took
David.
all the furniture.
Thank you, David, for asking, but no, that wasn't the problem. No,
He was so comfortable with that furniture, he took it all with him.
I mean, I guess for me there was. I mean, again, the last 2 or 3 weeks of the election campaign was a sense of genuine surprise. The election, the result itself was a bit of a surprise in terms of where all the seats come out and everything. But no, I think for me it's always a great sense of honor. I mean, you do. I mean, you do feel a sense of not. I couldn't say it took me a year to feel comfortable in the job. I mean, I don't mind saying that, but I certainly feel. I think it's a sense of honor. I mean, it is, and also, frankly, it's a sense of, not so much personal achievement, but achievement to say, well, here we are, we've done it, now let's get on with it. Thing is, though, you don't really have the luxury. I mean, the great thing about living in our democracy is you haven't got very many people around you who are saying, well, sir. I mean, it's like, okay, now you're on. You've got the scrum outside, and they're waiting to see you, and they're going to ask you a question about where'd you buy your shoes yesterday. And you know, you've got to, that's what you have to get used to.
Mr. Harris, if you had $1 for every time somebody told you you'd never be premier, you'd be a very rich man today.
Yes, I'd be wealthy. We'd all be wealthy, except for Ernie Eves. He knew when he won the leadership,
He knew he was going to be premier.
Absolutely nobody thought Bob Ray was going to be, including Bob Ray. And David and I, it's debatable. But
when you sat in the chair, you remember what you thought?
Iffy. I was, contrary to David, I was scared. I was nervous. I was scared silly. I thought, okay, here I am, now what? And I knew it was a daunting task ahead and whatnot. I mean, it didn't take me long to get into it. And, you know, as Bob says, pretty soon you're out there in the scrum and there you're there.
Could you afford to share that view with anybody? Could you afford to share that view with anybody?
Nobody. Perhaps my family. Perhaps my family. My father, who I used to, you know, confide in. Of course not.
What did your dad tell you when you told him that?
Well, the same advice that he gave me when I was scared going into the election. And the night before the debate, I had to debate two giant debaters, you know, that were there. The first debate that I had, just, you know, be yourself. You can do it. He was always had a great deal of faith and confidence in me, and it was reassuring. And he helped me through a lot part of my career.
How about you? You knew you were going to be premier. When you won your leadership convention, you obviously knew you were going to be premier. Does that make it different?
I've been in the Premier's office many times, mostly hauled up on the carpet by my good friend Michael. But it's, I would say there's a great sense of pride and privilege and honor. Very few people get the opportunity to lead a government in our democratic society, and I really consider it to be an honor and a privilege. I can recall, Michael may recall this when I mention it, he and I having a discussion one night. We had a very difficult agenda when we first started our 10 years government. We did a lot of things that weren't very popular. And I can recall him in the middle of a cabinet meeting, he and I taking a bit of a break and going into his office, and he'd say, you know, do you have problems sleeping at night? Because there are some very tough decisions that have to be made.
Did you have trouble sleeping at night?
I think we all probably have, if we don't want to be direct about it from time to time. These are not easy decisions. Sure, once you make a decision, you go on and you implement it and you do it to the best of your ability, but we are human beings.
I wonder who premiers take advice from, and in particular, whether they take advice from people who previously had the job. Did you ever call any of your predecessors, or did they call you and say whatever?
On certain issues, you know, Bill Davis was, I valued his advice on certain national issues, constitutional issues, or issues, judgments with respect to other personalities you had to deal with across the country.
How'd that work, though? Would you call him?
I'd run into him, or it was more informal than formal, but he was pretty wise about dealing with some of these things. He had different approaches and different ways of doing things than I did. But
Didn't bother you, he was in a different party.
No. You know, Stephen, I think one of the things you will find when you get out of the partisan game, partisanship fades away, and friendship tends to take over. And you know, you see a lot of these people. I mean, you're talking to 4 former First Ministers of Ontario. But you could be talking to the same former First Ministers right across this nation. We all know each other. We've been engaged in debates, and these are Tories, NDPs, separatists, or whatever, and there's a friendship and common purpose is stronger than the partisanship today. I really believe that.
Mr. Rabith, given the way you came to office, defeating the guy beside you, my hunch is you didn't call him for advice.
Not a lot at first, but a little bit more later on when we were dealing with the constitutional issues, definitely. I spent a lot of time talking to Bill Davis, and Bill Davis had been a friend when I got into Parliament, when I got into the legislature, and he was leader of the government. And we established a very good personal relationship, and that's maintained to this day. And I still think he's got great judgment about issues and people. And he was very good about things like, you know, it sounds stupid, but it's the simple stuff, like only do so much in a day. You know, think out, try to really take care of yourself a little bit, you know, in terms of dealing with crises, the sort of things that Ernie was talking about, sleeping. You know, because there are times when you lose sleep, and and if you lose sleep, you're not performing well. These are just sort of basic health issues you got to deal with. I found talking, after I got to know them better, the first few months in office, I found talking to other First Ministers was very, very helpful. I spent, not just, you know, I had friends, and you know, Joe Gibbs was a great friend of David's and of mine, and I admired him a lot. And
Premier Pete, yeah.
Premier of Prince Edward Island, spent a lot of time with him. I talked a lot with Roy Romano and Mike Harcourt when they got into office, but certainly Gary Filman from Manitoba was, over time, became a very good friend, and we spent a lot of time. We would spend a lot of time at premiers meetings just chatting about, well, how do you deal with this, or what do you think about that, or how are you going to face up to this problem? And whether it was, the issues we have in common in terms of education, healthcare, also issues of people management. Well, is it a big cabinet, is it a small cabinet? What do you do with people who are this or that? How do you do? But there's so many common problems, and I think it's learning as you get more comfortable in the job. You become, I think, much more at ease with talking to other people about, well, how do you make this decision? What did you do that for? Or how would you do it that way? And you start to really admire people. I mean, I think every other premier admired Frank McKenna for the way in which he was able to make decisions and for his ability to focus on some of the key issues facing his province. And given the amount of time that Frank used to spend in Toronto in those days, you get to see him quite a lot.
Mr. Harris, who
He
would
was
you,
hunting, wasn't he?
He was hunting.
what previous premiers would you have called?
All kinds, and I think that we touched on, certainly not limited to Ontario, not limited to your province.
But you never would have called Bob Ray for advice, would you?
Bob and I chat. Again, I would say it would be more later on.
But
Constitutional stuff and some of those, and we all got together, all of us, I think, when it came to
How does the bitterness of election losses or victories that will not overcome all of that?
Well, I don't know how much bitterness there is. There's disappointment. I'm not sure that there's great bitterness, but I think you overcome it by. I mean, when it came to the referendum, which was shortly after my watch, it's the commonality of purpose and of what we all agreed was important, and we were united on that issue. And there's many issues we would have been united on,
I wonder if Bob,
that helps overcome any of the disagreements of the past.
I wonder, Bob Ray, if you would, if I'm right in saying that Mike Harris takes over June 1995. There's a referendum in October of 1995 where the future of the country is at stake. And you've been premier for the previous 5 years and obviously think you've got a pretty good handle on these issues. And the guy beside you had been premier for 5 years and had his Meech Lake adventure as well. Do you not at some point in your inner recesses think, I could be handling this way better than this guy, and unfortunately he's there and I'm not?
No, actually, no, because it's a futile expenditure of emotion. Mike and I went over to Mike's office at his request when I was still in the House, and we went over and we talked about the issue. We went over and said, Mike was giving a speech at the Canadian Club and the Empire Club, one of those places, and said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I'll do whatever you like." He said, "I'd like you to be on the podium with me." I said, "I'll be on the podium with you." He says he wants Ontario to be, expressing itself in a clear way. I said, "I think that's very important for that to happen." And he
help write the speech.
He asked me for advice on what should I say in the speech. I said, "Well, here's some of the things I'll go and write some stuff if some of it was in the speech." And I don't regard that as a strange thing. I mean, to me, that's what you would expect your politicians to do at a moment of national crisis.
Ernie Eves, can you give me an example of a time you would have called one of your predecessors and what the issue would have been about?
I've talked to everybody here at one time or another. David gave me advice at a Christmas party at my house, and I thought it was very good advice, quite frankly.
What was it about?
To look at the broad picture, to not get too caught up in the details. And his comment to me was that, if he had it to do all over again, he might take more time looking at the broad picture. That was helpful advice. I talked to Bob many times, phoned Bob for advice about different things. I don't know if he remembers this, but when we were in opposition and you were the government, Charlie Harnick and I were members of the Constitutional Committee that traveled around the country. And he literally would not start a meeting without me being there and sought out advice and asked me what I thought. And Michael, of course, has been a great personal friend and provided a lot of advice to me, both when I was finance minister and premier. I relied upon Premier Davis many, many times. I think that we all agree that I really respect his perspective of public service. And he was always somebody you could go to.
I think it is fair to say one thing. We say we're not different. There is something different about being premier. I would say that seeking out other premiers' opinions and those that had the file probably took place a lot more than than just a cabinet minister level or a caucus member. I mean, the nonpartisan nature. And perhaps, you know, David, you alluded to the first ministers' meetings. We had a lot of common cause. Some of them were beating up on the federal government, but there were a lot of commonality, and we got to know each other pretty well. And so I think it is a club that is exclusive, and it is a club that like, I never once felt, if I consulted a former premier, I never once felt that was going to leak into the press, or that I would be betrayed in that. Whereas I don't think I would have had that same confidence with some ministers or some others. There was just a certain respect there.
What do you mean you
very,
think?
very important.
Just to
Well,
illustrate Michael's point, and probably the most intense experience of my political life was involved in the constitutional negotiations. And Bob was there. Bob was leader of the opposition, and Bob was invited around, included in all the briefings. His advice was sought. And so was Michael. You were there too. And I didn't consider it a partisan issue. This was, I viewed it then, as I still view it, as probably one of the most important issues in the history of the country. But I made friends out of that. The Peter Lougheeds, the Don Gettys, the Gary Filmons, the Frank McKennas. The Robert Barrasso was a very dear friend of mine. And the guy that really let everybody the country down was a liberal, Clyde Wells, in my opinion. No, I realize that not everybody shares my view on that, but the point is it wasn't partisan. There were many, many issues way beyond our partisanship, our political affiliation, or our provincial affiliation. It was about this country. And somehow or other, a lot of good people rallied around that flag at a lot of important times in the history of this country, and I include my three friends here. Yeah.
I know all of you have talked today about the parts of the job that you love the most. I would like to get a little sense about what the necessary evils are in being premier that you really couldn't stand to do. Bob Ray, what was something on the job you really didn't like doing?
Firing people, dealing with personnel problems, dealing with, I don't know, any cabinet change. Sometimes you just make a change because you've got to make a change. And that's always very stressful. And it's not just, it's also, you're also responsible for appointing deputies. So you've got to look at all, do you need to make a change in deputy ministers' people? Do you have to make some difficult decisions with respect to people's personal conduct or something that's happened? I don't think anybody enjoys those experiences. The premier who's not here told me that he thought it was the worst part of the job without any question. In fact, the late Eddie Goodman, who is no longer with us, used to tell me that he did it for him. So I don't know whether that's true or not, but I do know that I think that's the toughest. It goes with the territory. You have to do it.
Firing Peter Cormos was really hard?
Well, no, some of them are a little easier. Some of them are easier than others. But I think it's getting used to doing that and knowing how to do it well, and then moving on quickly. Because you can't afford, I mean, the one thing about this job is you can't afford too much time for remorse or second thoughts or, well, what if, or you can't, you've just got to get on it and do it. And the day you do it is the next day you're up in the House saying it was the greatest thing in the world and it was fine, it was intelligent, and you got the leader of the opposition telling you what a
hardest part of the job, Mike Harris?
Well, I think Bob has touched on part of it, and I don't disagree with that. But that what differentiates the premier from any other CEO? That's tough for any CEO. Yeah. That part of the job, the picking one over the other in selection of cabinet, letting some go, staff, personnel. What is different, I think, from most companies and most CEOs is that we are also the chief spokesman for your party in critiquing the other leaders come election time. So you're the one that's to point out Bob Ray's weaknesses. You're the one that's to point out all the things that he's terrible at,
you didn't
all
like
the things
that?
he's wrong.
You never had any trouble doing that.
No, I don't want to get into how much was there, but that's not fun. And I don't think, you don't see the CEO of Burger King going out running down McDonald's or whatnot. I mean, it's because we come to our job a little different way at election time, and a big part of campaigning now is yes, it's positive, what's your platform, what's there, but it's also you are expected to critique the other guy's performance and the other guy's or girl's pass and record. And that I didn't enjoy that.
Let's take a look at what we had a good laugh seeing what David Peterson looked like in 1982. How about Ernie Eves in 1995? I know you were a magnificent Adonis, I know.
I'm going to laugh at whoever up next.
Here's Ernie Eves 11 years ago when he was Mike Harris's finance minister, and we want to talk about tough parts of the job. You came in and I think in the first couple of months of the job you cut more than $2.5 billion worth of spending like that, and not everybody thought it was a great idea.
That's when we
true.
weren't sleeping too good.
Roll
right.
tape.
Our government has a renewal plan for Ontario that will restore our financial and social well-being through economic stability and job creation. The plan is based on 3 building blocks: balancing the budget and squarely facing grave personal and economic costs of high levels of debt.
First of all, should I ask you about the hair?
The hair.
No, let's move on. Let's move on.
Hair's changed a bit.
It has. Everybody assumes that it's hard to do what you did. I know you thought it was necessary to do. When you look back at it, was it as difficult as we thought at the time?
It was difficult, but the thing that helped us, of course, is we had a very good plan, I felt, that you could follow. I think if you get elected and you don't have a plan, I think it may be a lot more difficult. But I really thought that we did it fairly well, if I do say so myself. Although a lot of decisions were not easy because you're affecting people's lives.
Was it easier to become
and you
premier?
have to look at the broader good.
Was it easier to become premier? None of these 3 had any experience in government before they became premier. You did. You were a finance minister, which is about as close as you get. Did that make being premier easier?
In a way it did, and in a way it did not. In a way it did because you've been exposed to, and Mike included me in many, many things, so I was all part of those discussions and decisions. However, the part that made it more difficult, I think, is that sometimes you know too much. I mean, all the intricacies of finance, of all the ministries of the government, and you get bogged down in detail as opposed to looking at the broad picture in a broader perspective. So I would say, again, it was there's 2 sides to the coin.
Worst part of the job, David Peterson?
I was thinking about that when Michael and Bob were talking, and I actually agree with them. But I think it was the harder part for me. It was just this constant, unbearing scrutiny. You come in the morning, and there's guys trying to beat you up, and you leave at night, and you go into question period, and they want to beat you up.
So it's
And then
media
when you're
and
leaving,
opposition?
Most of
and
the
all
media,
of
right?
that. Well,
Most of the media,
it's a
they were the
combination
worst.
of all of that. You're always on display, and there's a lot of gotcha stuff in politics. And
Did you accept that as part of the
yes,
theater of the job?
Absolutely. I'm not whining about this, but you asked me what the tougher, personally, and I don't miss that part of politics at all, that endless scrutiny, trying to prove you're stupid or jump on you or go after you. And people have to understand this. I use this analogy. Is when you're the first minister, you have all of the responsibility for everything. And everybody, half of the people by definition do not like you, would like you out of there, and would like you to make you look stupid. And there's so much violent criticism of each other in this business. It's no wonder people have so little respect for the
So
system
why don't
when
you
it
all tone it
appears that
down?
politicians have so little respect.
So why don't you all tone it down?
I hate to tell you, Stephen, it's been going on for 400 years. This is nothing new about this, but we just see it all now with television and instantaneous transmission of all this. And we're so hard on ourselves when we're involved in the partisan game. It's no wonder that most people think that politicians are not very nice people, or self-serving, or stupid, or incompetent.
I think it's Charlie Krauthammer is a friend of mine, is an American journalist, born in Canada, said to me, he said, look, if and that's really Mike's point about Burger King, but he said if Ford and General Motors ran their business the way politicians run their business, nobody would buy cars, because Ford would be saying GM's a terrible product, and GM would be saying Ford's a terrible product, and by the end of it, everybody rides a bike. I mean, it's like, and I think that really is part of what's happened to the culture of politics. Is simply a product of the adversarial system, and that is that you are building yourself up, and you are also criticizing the opponent. But there is the additional element which David also referred to, and that is the media. Remember Matthew Barrett, who was chairman of the Bank of Montreal, and he was, once after he'd been premier for a while, he came to see me. He said, "You guys are having a lot of trouble." I said, "Matthew," I said, "okay, you're the president of the Bank of Montreal, right? You go into work in the morning. Imagine you've got a scrum. You go down to the King, your office at King Street. You don't get to go up the private elevator. You got to go in through with everybody else, and you've got a scrum of 40 reporters every single morning saying, do you know what your guy in the Sault Ste. Marie branch did yesterday? Do you know who he turned down for a loan?" And you go on and on. I said it would, and you do that every day, every single day.
Did he get it?
And 3 times a day. You got it, and it starts. And I said you cannot compare the level of scrutiny and the fishbowl that we work in comparison with any other walk of life.
Did he get it?
I don't think you ever get it until you've been through it. I don't think you understand
true.
what it's
That's
like
very
until
true.
you've been through
Well,
it.
part of what you all went through were, of course, demonstrations. And I got to ask you this question, Mr. Harris. You had some of the most lively.
Did I have the biggest?
I think you did. I'm pretty sure you did.
Those and demonstrations.
I have
all-
the meanest.
You all had your share, but I want to know whether any of you changed or altered a decision that you made as premier based on the size or ferocity of a demonstration that you saw on the South Lawn of Queen's Park, for example.
Absolutely not. I don't think anybody will say that they did. However, let me say this. There's two things. One, early on in my mandate, we had a fundraiser in Kingston, and the OPP that were traveling with me said, we can't go in. We can't go in. It's going to be too violent. You're at risk and whatnot. Anyway, we waited an hour and a half and we went in. And after when we left and we asked about what happened, there was a fire set on the roof. There were all kinds of things. And basically, the report that I got from the people that traveled with me is pretty much the same people that were there when Peterson came and when Ray came and whatnot. You know, and that helped for me to put these protests into perspective. It's a way to get on TV. Often the issue didn't even matter. Now, I do want to say issues did develop the size of it, and the second point of some of the demonstrations. I think it probably, and I helped bring our caucus together, bring our cabinet together, bring our caucus together, unite us in this cause.
A sense of being under siege?
Well, yeah, maybe it's a siege mentality, a little bit, and a resolve that, I mean, we always viewed we were doing the right thing, so if you had big demonstrations, you had a communication problem to some people, or they weren't going to listen anyway, one of the two.
Mr. Peterson, you ever change a decision?
No, I think Michael's right. But let me tell us, I was just thinking of Michael's point in a contemporary context. I've been involved in this Caledonia deal, or at least I was at the beginning, and I was involved in a huge riot. And people were screaming and yelling. I mean, it was really primitive. It was mankind at its worst. And there was one particular guy who was yelling at me and dogging me and ragging me, and I finally said, where are you from? He said, Windsor. He'd seen this thing on television, and it was like the devil threw a party, invited all his friends, right? And this guy just showed up to raise hell and to cause trouble because that's what he liked doing. And it goes to Michael's point. So I think we all understand that, and those kind of things never particularly bothered me. Other things bothered me, but those things
Let me ask Bob Ray about this, because
healthy.
you quite famously, on the first anniversary of your election, changed your position on public auto insurance. And there were a number of demonstrations prior to that which took place. Were they at all influential in your decision?
No, there were hardly any demonstrations about public auto insurance.
Well, the industry
One
put a
way
few
or the
together.
other. Well, you know, they weren't exactly homemade signs. I mean, those things you don't worry about. I think, you know, actually, I think what you worry about more is something which you actually think is spontaneous. You know, where you sort of say, well, what is public opinion really telling me here about something? The demonstrations that are highly organized and highly synthetic, you develop a strong resistance to those things because it's like mail-in campaigns. You know, are you affected by? It's like saying, you could ask the question, are you affected by letters that you receive? And the answer is, I'm not actually affected by mass mailings, which all have the same message and they're all put out by whatever lobby is out there putting them out. But occasionally a letter gets through and you see a letter and you said, actually, that person's got a point. There's something that you've done or something you've said or something that a minister has done or whatever.
Do you recall an example off the top of your head?
No, I mean, I can remember feeling on Sunday shopping that we were on the wrong side of history, that opinion had moved and opinion had shifted, and there was absolutely no point in sticking to a position that just didn't have enough public support to sustain itself. And
We all were at one time.
I think a lot of people went through that process. David went through it earlier than others.
You guys should have agreed with us.
Yeah, well, you know, but I mean,
See, you guys get smart. They're slow, but they're good people, but they're slow, Steve. That's the problem.
Let me move into our final segment. We've got about 10 minutes and change left here, and I want to talk about life after politics. And I want to know, Mr. Eves, starting with you, is there anything, you were in politics a long time, right? You first elected in '81,
Right.
and you just got out a few years ago. Is there anything that you're doing now that compared to the thrill of being premier of the province?
No, I don't think, to use a line of Bill Davis's, I think the most exciting day in the private sector is probably a little duller than the dullest day in government. I think that you're making decisions that impact on the lives of many, many millions of people. You're doing the best you can for the public good. But I don't think there's ever anything that compares with that in the private sector. However, I think that I and everybody else here that I know of still contributes somewhat to public service in one way or another. I know I'm certainly doing that with respect to Mr. McGuinty has asked me to help out with investment and trade matters in the province. It's not something that makes me a lot of money, but it's something that I relish doing, and I like to do it to improve the lot of the people in the province of Ontario.
Premier also asked you, David Peterson, to do Caledonia, get in there and try and settle things down. Is it difficult to recapture the purpose in private life that you clearly felt in public life?
Well, Ernie's right. Nothing will duplicate. I remember the thrill, the adrenaline rush, the sense of fun, and the big influence you have in public life. But there's many ways to serve, and as we all do, at much lower intensity level. There's lots of wonderful causes, and there's lots of wonderful people that have been in political life. So, I'm happy to. I'm involved in a lot of things, from the University of Toronto to hospitals to. I lecture, and I have a very happy life. Never the same intensity. But actually, I don't want the same intensity again. I've done it, and I was proud to be there, and I don't want to go back.
Talking about intense, Mr. Harris, you had one of the most intense premierships out there. Even Sean Conway, the former Liberal cabinet minister, said you were one of the seminal change agents, premiers in Ontario history. Is it difficult to recapture the purpose of life now in the private sector that you had before?
Certainly the excitement, the intensity. I think what was the word you used first?
Thrill.
Yeah, the thrill. Nothing, yeah, although maybe if I'm made CEO of a company of a couple million people sometimes, any in the private sector you're looking for. No.
Leave your resume at the door on the way out?
Leave my resume at the door. No, nothing will compare with that because of the public side of it, and as David said, the 3 times a day under scrutiny. Having said that, I certainly don't regret it. I think it was the most wonderful experience I had, and I've been privileged. I think we would all say that we've been privileged to have had this opportunity to serve and the learning that went on with it. The sense of public purpose, you never lose that. You never lose that. I tell you, if a premier anywhere across this country or a prime minister called any one of us, I think, and said, we've got an important thing, this is important for your country, it's important for your province, we need that purpose is there. David's served, we're all there for that. So it's a different, it's certainly less stressful in many, many ways, but I don't want to go back either. I'm like David, I'm delighted,
Look at Bob Ray laughing. Look at Bob Ray
I don't want to go back. I don't know why anybody in the four of us would want to go back.
Question, what's the matter with Bob Ray?
Well,
Back to the chief.
there was a method to my madness of leaving you for the end here, Bob Ray.
That was quite obvious, Steve.
Michael, roll tape.
Here's the...
As I declare today my candidacy for the leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada, I want to assure you that I'm going to devote myself to this task with all the energy and all the skill that I can muster.
You're back in.
Absolutely.
Was it just too thrilling to give
No,
up
as
on
you make
ultimately?
this is not about
Make more mistakes, that's what you think.
This is not about adrenaline. This is about, I guess it's about service, and this happens to be a moment when I feel I can be of service again in politics and public life, and if it happens, it happens. For me, it's a great opportunity, and these things don't happen very often. And I felt at this particular time, this juncture in my life, I mean, if you'd asked me the question 5 or 6 months ago, if we'd had this panel, I mean, I did the Air India review for Mr. Martin. I did work for Mr. Chrétien on federalism around the world. I did work for Premier McGuinty on higher education. And we've all done very well in terms of interesting life in the law firm. I had a wonderful time with the Goodman's firm, which is a wonderful place to be. Mike's there as well. And
We want you back.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Some people do, some people don't. But seriously, I mean, I guess in the end, I mean, I don't regard politics as a bed of nails. I don't regard it as an impossible task, and I do regard it as a kind of a service. And I think when I remember Ernie phoned me when he'd been out of politics for a while and he was thinking about going back in, And we were chatting about it because you do have, I mean, you can play golf more often, you can have a more comfortable life, you can make more money, which is something where, everybody assumes you go into politics to make money. You don't. In Canada, you get out of politics to pay off the debts that you built up when you were in politics. And that's just a reality of how we live. But the fact of the matter is that, when Ernie phoned me, I said, well, you have to ask yourself the question. When you're on the 18th tee, are you going to say to yourself, geez, I wish I'd tried for that job. I wish I'd given it a shot. Or would you say, I didn't really want to do it anyway? And it seems to me that's the kind of choice you face. And I think I was talking about this with Arlene, and she said, look, the same question. Is it something you want to try? And is it something that if you try and don't make, will you feel better than if you tried and if you never tried at all? And for me, I've always said to my kids, there's nothing wrong with not getting something, and there's nothing wrong with losing, but not trying if you think you've got something to do, that's something you should do.
So Mr. Ray left and came back, you left and came back, and you two have constantly been rumored to be on the comeback trail. Is this something that you just never get away from? Once you've been in, they always assume you want back in?
Well, not everybody wants us back in, David. We do know that. We both had successes and we both had experiences, but I've never. I mean, I was. It's true. I mean, I did take a little bit of time to consider federal politics.
You courted you were very much courted for the conservative
yes, I was.
leadership.
And I love the job that Harper's doing, and I'm really glad I didn't do it.
You are.
I very
no
happy.
regrets about that.
No regrets at all.
Apropos of Mr. Ray's comments, you're not sorry you didn't try?
No, not at all. No. Bob says you got to ask yourself, and I think you have to ask yourself: do you want to win? Do you want to be Prime Minister of the country? Not do you want to be leader of the party.
No, absolutely.
Do you want to be Prime Minister? Do I want to spend the next 10 years campaigning for and then being the Prime Minister of the country? And perhaps if I had not been Premier, perhaps if I was 20 years younger, there may have been a lot of perhapses. But I had no difficulty making that decision, and I had no regrets for the decision.
I think it's either in your DNA or it isn't. I mean, some people do. I also think that there's a time to come and a time to go. And I think that this world is changing very dramatically,
But you didn't go
particularly
when
since...
You didn't go when you wanted to.
I know, I didn't want to go, and I hated losing, but I accept it. And they also know you're going to lose or retire one day, and you have to sort of build your own personal life to deal with that, because everybody has that to deal with at some point about it. Sometimes it's voluntary, sometimes it isn't. But then you go on to, there's different stages in one's life, and the world changes so fast. The way that the young people identify today is with different icons, different language, different literacy, different issues, post 9/11. This is a totally different country than it was. And I think I'm one of those that believes it takes new voices, new generations, new ideas, and new leadership. So I just think it's, at some point, we old guys have to fade into the woodwork and say, it's time for us.
What is that nonsense? Partisan nonsense.
I'm going to jump in here and use my moderator's prerogative because we got about 2 minutes left, and I want to play some tape from Mike Harris still. Here is Mike Harris making history, something that hadn't been done in more than 70 years, going from third place to first place in one election. Roll tape.
And my fellow Ontarians, having spent 5 years as leader of my party, meeting people where they live and where they work, discussing with them their hopes and their dreams for this great province. Tonight, I am humbled.
At the end of the day, was that your best night in politics?
It was the most exciting. It was the most exciting night in politics. And if exciting is the best, then that was it.
Okay. I want to read one more thing here, and there's a quote that I'm sure all of you have heard before, but I want to share it with our audience anyway. Here's Teddy Roosevelt. Let's bring this up, Michael. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man in the arena whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end of the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who have never known neither victory nor defeat.
Hear, hear.
You say hear, hear.
I think we'll
Speaks for all of you, eh?
Great line.
I think
Yeah, wonderful line.
great line in
put.
life, not just politics.
Absolutely.
Great line in life, too.
Yeah.
I want to thank all four of you for coming in for what was truly an historic broadcast. I know I send good wishes on behalf of the four of you to Bill Davis, who I suspect is
Absolutely.
watching on
He's
TV.
better than the four of us put together, so get him on his own
That's why you
show.
need four of us.
We wish you well, Mr. Davis. Please get well soon. Great seeing you again. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.